Yo family, welcome back to another video for Destiny 2 episode Heresy. So in the video today, I'm going to be going through all of the changes to all exotic armor pieces for Hunter, Titan and Warlock. I have pre and post testing for all of them as well, so you can see exactly the changes have been made and well whether these are going to be some exotics you want to put inside your theory crafting and build crafting for this season. There are some good ones in here guys, and as usual there are some where not much has really changed at all, but we're going to cover all of that. So if you enjoy the video or find it helpful, make sure to leave a like, as it's the best free way of supporting me and the channel. And I do have a ton more guides on the way, builds, a lot of different content coming for episode Heresy. So if you do find yourself enjoying today's video, then make sure to subscribe as well so you don't miss out on any of that. But for now, let's get started. So to kick things off, we have the Sealed Ahamkara Grasps for the Hunter. This intrinsic perk is Nightmare Fuel. Dealing melee damage reloads your currently equipped weapon. Charged melee final blows reload all weapons. Provides a large benefit to the airborne effectiveness stat of all weapons. And movement speed and jump height after dealing melee damage. So this is the pre-testing before Heresy went live. This is how it used to read, and this is how it works. So I have never ever used this exotic in my life guys. I just didn't think that it offered anything that I couldn't do, you know, in other ways and means with mods and things like that. I don't really care about airborne effectiveness outside of PvP, and obviously like things like movement speed and reload speed, all that kind of stuff, and reloading weapons, you can do that with holsters and different things like that. So I've just never really found any use to it. So yeah, sure, getting a melee kill, things like that, reload your weapons and offers you all of these passive buffs. So essentially what Bungie have changed about this is they say that they reworked it with a weapon swapping focus to differentiate it from other Hunter reload exotics. It now reads powered melee and finisher final blows grant Nightmare Fuel, increasing handling and airborne effectiveness, whilst active freshly drawn weapons deal additional damage and grant Nightmare Fuel on final blows. Gaining Nightmare Fuel reloads all holstered weapons. So it still retains that need for the melee kill, and it also still retains the stat bumps plus the reload, but now it offers a damage buff as well. And quite honestly guys, it's a pretty healthy damage buff. So without Nightmare Fuel, with the auto rifle that I'm using just for the purposes of testing with a primary, it does 1966 to the body and 3451 at crit. When you have Nightmare Fuel active, this goes up to 2654 to the body and 4658 as a crit. Now this is just over 34%, so if we round this up, it's actually a 35% damage buff, which is actually one of the highest damage buffs in the game, considering that at 4 stacks of armor charges for weapon surges, that only gives you 25%. Radiant has now been nerfed as well, so that's less as well. So this is a really good damage buff guys. The problem is that you are constantly going to be having to swap weapons due to the Nightmare Fuel only having a 6-second timer. Now when you're in the heat of combat, obviously I'm just testing this in a lost sector so it's easier to break down and for you guys to see, but honestly, how often are you going to be doing this? Are you really going to want this to take up your exotic slot and constantly be swapping weapons? It also requires that melee kill to trigger, which yes in itself isn't that difficult, but obviously there are situations like boss fights and things where you will want to take advantage of that 35% damage buff, where you're going to require an enemy around to get that melee kill on. So it's a nice change, but I can't see it being meta anytime soon, and it's not really something that I'm planning on using. But there you go, do with that information as you will guys. It's a nice damage buff, it's a nice change, but I don't think it changes too much in how much this is going to be used. So moving on from there, we have the Gwizin or Gwizin vest, however it's said. I know they debated this in the dev live stream as well. I'm not really sure, but whatever you want to call it, you know what we're talking about. So this has the armor perk Roving Assassin, which used to say each spectral blade kill you make before going into stealth will restore more of your super energy. So essentially this exotic is an enhancement for Roman supers, and it is probably the worst Roman super of them all because its hit reg has always been terrible and it doesn't really offer too much in PvE. Whenever it was used, it was always as a PvP exotic. So Bungie have made some changes to it. It says that it now progresses its super returns on super hits as well as kills before coming invisible. Improve the maximum possible super energy gains per return, whilst also increasing the amount of progress needed for maximum gains. It also now emits a cloud of weakening smoke when you exit invisibility whilst nearby an enemy, works both in neutral and while in super. So as you can see from the pre-testing and the post-testing, yes, you do get a nice amount of super back. I don't think it's enough to make this thing worth using though. I know we had the changes to super cooldowns for Roman supers as well recently, but even so, with this additional abilities to it, I just don't think it's powerful enough as a Roman super to use in something like GMs or whatever the case may be. You can run through strikes with whatever you like, but honestly, I don't think this is enough, despite the fact that there is a noticeable increase. It's nothing crazy, but it is noticeable, but I don't think it's enough to use. It's a shame though, because the neutral part of this is actually really cool. So obviously you get that weakening cloud at all times, which is really good. That part of it is actually good, but again, with the new aspect, which does somewhat similar, and other ways of using invis and weaken, again, it doesn't do anything to tilt the shift for me in terms of becoming my new hunter main exotic. So next up, really easy, really simple, really quick one is the renewal grasps. Essentially, when you throw down a Duskfield grenade, when you stand inside of it, you will get frost armor slowly building up. Frost armor, of course, gives you damage reduction. It goes up to 5 stacks, and if you have the Whisper of Rhyme fragment equipped, this can go up to times 8 stacks. Essentially, the only change that has been made to the renewal grasp exotic, guys, is it says that it's doubled the rate of frost armor gain whilst in the enhanced Duskfield grenade. As you can see from the pre-testing and the post-testing, it is a noticeable speed change. It does go a lot quicker, but honestly, if you weren't using renewal grasp before, I don't think this change is going to make you start doing so. That's not to say though that the renewal grasps aren't good with the stasis build. They are. I just think if you, as I said, if you weren't using them before, this isn't a big significant change that's going to make you put down whatever you were using. Moving on, we have the Foe Tracer exotic helmet with the Relentless Tracker perk. It said damaging a powerful combatant or guardian with an ability temporarily increases weapon damage of the same type. Defeating that marked target with damage that matches the element creates an elemental pickup. So this started being used a couple of seasons back, guys, because it offers a decent damage buff for not much work. Literally, all you need to do is make sure that the energy of your weapon matches the same as your abilities. So obviously, if it's strand, you want a strand one. If it's solar, you want solar, etc, etc. And upon damaging an enemy with that ability, it used to give you a 6-second timer for a 25% damage buff. They have now increased this up to 15 seconds. So you have 15 seconds of a 25% damage buff just for hitting an enemy with an ability that matches your weapon. And then if you kill the enemy that is marked by doing so, you get an elemental pickup that matches as well. So again, already, just to reinstate my point that I made about the sealed Ahamkara grasps earlier, to get that 35% buff from that exotic, you've got to get a melee kill, and then you've got to continuously swap weapons to fight against that 6-second timer. With this one, all you need to do, for example, let's say you are using a smoke bomb as your melee, throw the smoke bomb at the boss, which is going to inflict damage, have a void weapon, then you've got 15 seconds of 25% damage buff, and it's as easy as that. You can also reproc this by using the dodge, which gives you your melee charge fully back, and you can continuously use this when the timer runs out. So already in that fact, this one is so much better, and honestly, this is just improved by having double the time that you get the buff for. So if you were already using this, then you're going to continue to, and if you haven't tried it out, then I suggest doing so, because this is a very good exotic. So for the first time in this video, I would say that that is a W change. Next up, we have the Radiant Dance Machine exotic leg armor, and these have had some funny meme times and niches where these have been able to do some absolutely crazy things. So pre-Heresy launch, the armor perk The Dance said activating your dodge ability whilst near targets allows you to dodge additional times for a short period. Defeating targets extends the duration of the additional dodge. So essentially, there wasn't too much rocket science to it, guys. You would go and dodge near something, and you would just have a 6-second timer where you could get as many dodges off as you could. And getting kills in between time would extend that timer by a couple of seconds. Now, the problem with this before is that it didn't proc things like Dynamo. So obviously Dynamo using your class ability near enemies gives you super energy back. It didn't proc things which are normally done off dodges, so things like your clones for stranded, stuff like that. But Bungie have made changes to this exotic. So what they basically said is Radiant Dance Machines has been reworked to allow the multiple dodge charges that it grants to count as real dodges for the purposes of perks and aspects. The trigger mechanism for granting extra dodges requires more effort to compensate for that, but the overall change is a large increase in strength and utility. We've also added some flat benefits to primary weapons that are a real game changer for players who prioritise gun feel and performance when mobile. They've improved the airborne effectiveness and hipfire mobility, range and accuracy for primary weapons. Multi-kills with primary ammo weapons refund dodge energy. When dodge energy is full, multi-kills grant extra charges. Powerful combatants and guardians count as more than one kill. So they've completely done away with the timer portion of the exotic. Now instead, when you get multi-kills with a primary weapon, instead it grants you additional charges. From what I've seen and tested, the maximum you can get at any one time is 3, but these 3 dodges will now proc anything that requires a dodge or class ability to do so. So as you can see, this does now work with Dynamo. You can get off 3 strand clones back to back, so you can have 3 strand clones all in the same place or wherever you choose to do them. And the removal of the timer means that you're in much more control of doing so. You haven't got to worry about that running out. If you got your 3 dodge charges, you can use them however you please to get back super energy, to get back class ability energy, to proc anything, as I said, that requires a dodge specifically or a class ability usage. And from what I can tell, guys, it consistently seems to be 3 red bar kills that you need to get to satisfy being multi-kills with your primary, and that will give you a full dodge charge. So 9 kills, you've got your 3 dodge charges, and you can use them however you want. Again, W change, and I think there's some really cool builds that can be made with this exotic. The final change for hunters is they said since they made the changes to Roman supers being able to be acquired quicker, there's been a way higher use of the Silk Strike super for Strand and also for Golden Gun as well, which negated the need for using weapons very often because you were able to get your supers back so quickly. So for the Relativism exotic class item for the cloak, specifically for Spirit of Galanor, they've reduced the maximum amount of energy refunded for Silk Strike and Golden Gun to 30%, down from 50%. It doesn't seem to me, guys, like, you know, there's been that much difference there, but obviously that's what they're saying. It is slightly different on the bar, but yeah, I don't think it's made a massive difference. I still think you'll be able to get those supers back quite quickly. So if you are a hunter main, let me know about the changes down below, what you think of them. For me, in my opinion, the best changes here are going to be the Foe Tracer and the Radiant Dance Machines. I think they have seen the most significant changes, and I think they were already good exotics, but they've now just become even better. So I don't really think Bungie have achieved anything in terms of making a new outlier for, you know, the exotic changes that they've made, but nevertheless, there are some good changes in here. Okay, so let's move on to the Titan. So first up, I guess I didn't really need to get footage post and pre-testing for this because it's not too different, but essentially Titan's ramparts became a problem in PvP a long while ago. Essentially people would just find a lane, put a barrier up that they could shoot through, and then it would just be sniper shots and just team fire, and it got a little bit crazy. So Bungie made some changes to this. But basically what they've done now is they've increased the barricade's health from 400 to 500. It no longer increases the barricade's cooldown when you've got Titan's ramparts equipped, and it no longer decreases the barricade duration. So they've essentially just made them stronger, and it doesn't take them any longer to come back from using this exotic. But they further increased damage to the barricades by Guardians from 125% to 160%. This results in near identical effective barricade health in PvP. It's a minus 2.5% less after these changes. So essentially they've made these stronger in PvE, and they've also tried to balance it out with an increase to the damage taken by Guardians so that it doesn't make things ridiculous in PvP again. Again, good change. There might be situations where you might want to shoot from cover and just provide yourself a little bit more safety with these. I personally wouldn't do that. I feel like it's a bit of a wasted exotic for PvE, especially in harder content, because when you've got that level of difficult enemy shooting at it, doesn't matter how much health it's been given, it's still going to go down pretty quickly. But I'm sure there probably will be some sort of situations where this might help. Next up, we have the Eternal Warrior, probably the ugliest exotic piece to ever exist. Nevertheless, it is pretty good in utility. So when you're using this exotic, when you are using an arc weapon, every 2 to 3 kills within 10 seconds of each other will grant you a stack of arc weapon surge for 11 seconds. This can go up to a maximum of ×4, which will give you a 25% damage buff. Any additional kills whilst you're at the ×4 weapon surge will also refresh the buff's duration. When you cast your Fist of Havoc super, you get a 75 HP overshield. And then when the super ends, you get that ×4 arc weapon surge, the 25% granted to you for 30 seconds for absolutely nothing. It just, when the super ends, that's what you get. So essentially the change that Bungie have made is very simple. All of the things that I've just listed, the perks still apply. However, now final blows with Fists of Havoc now grant extended super duration. So like your Doomfang Pauldrons for a Void, like the Guizin Vest for the Hunter that we talked about earlier, you are going to get a small amount of super energy for every kill that you get, essentially allowing you to extend the length of this super. So it's not, again, crazy guys, it's kind of a similar super return. I don't have an exact number on it because it's pretty difficult to calculate, but it gives you a little bit of energy, so it allows you to keep that super going, I'd say, for an additional 5 to 10 seconds on top of what it would have done before this change. So if you are somebody that likes to use this, of course, that's a W. I think it's a pretty good neutral game exotic anyway, just because of the fact that you can build up those weapon surges without actually having to have them equipped on armor. The overshield when you pop the super is nice. That was a problem in PvP again for a while. And of course, the 30 seconds of 25% damage buff when your super ends is nice to have as well. Again, guys, I think this is a nice change, but I don't think it's going to shake up the meta or become meta in any way. I just think, you know, in certain situations, if you are using this Roman super, it might be pretty good for that. But yeah, it's definitely not groundbreaking. Moving on from there, we have the Ursa Furiosa gauntlets. Ursine Guard used to say move faster while guarding with Sentinel Shield or the Unbreakable Shield. Damage blocked with either is converted to super energy. So this thing's always been good for stuff like GMs where you have things, I'm thinking specifically of things like Glassway when you play out from that room on the left hand side in the final boss encounter. Normally when you had enemies pushing you, you would get somebody to throw up the shield and have your other two teammates shoot from behind it, stuff like that. And whilst they're blocking, they're getting that super energy back. Now, I only really started to experiment with Unbreakable last season, and it's actually become very, very good. So the changes that they've made to this are actually very interesting. So it now says blocking damage with Unbreakable now returns grenade energy instead of super. Grenade energy is returned at the end of Unbreakable and is scaled based on the amount of damage you blocked with it. And honestly, guys, you can hold this thing for a decent amount of time. When I say decent, like you could literally cheese a bunch of champions, do a lot of different stuff with this. And I think the fact that they've now split it, so when you're in your super and you're blocking with your shield, that's still going to work in the same way as it did. So you're going to be able to use that same utility as I've just described and get that super energy back. But now you're also going to have a mini version of this up at nearly all times by blocking with the actual Unbreakable itself, getting grenade energy back instead of super. So as you can see, obviously I'm holding this for a decent amount of time, and when I let it go, I've got literally 3/4 of my grenade back again, so I can almost completely do it again. Now, I quickly just moved on to this setup, so I haven't got this set up as a build. There's no things in there that are giving me more grenade energy back and things like that. So literally, you could almost get this back consistently every single time, which I think is actually going to be very powerful, and I might have to look at making a build around that this season. So an insurmountable School Fort is up next, or more commonly known as the Disco Helmet. Transfusion Matrix said that kills with arc melee abilities trigger health regeneration and restore melee energy. Now, this has always been a very good exotic. It's obviously allowed you to continuously use your arc melee, kill an enemy, instantly get it back, and continue going on a spree doing so. The problem with this is when you try and use it in endgame, if you don't actually manage to kill the target that you're hitting with your melee, then you've lost that charge and you are in a lot of trouble. So Bungie basically said the same thing. They said as difficulty goes up, School Fort can feel overly punishing when you fail to land the final blow its perk demands. To alleviate this issue, we are extending its effect to grant partial refund from any melee attack to help rebuild that crucial momentum. So now grants energy to arc melee abilities when hitting targets with any melee attack. Amount granted varies based on the melee used, from most to least energy granted. Powered melees, non-glaive unpowered melees, while knockout is active, and unpowered melees including glaives. So as you can see, guys, when I hit Carl the Cabal and I was never ever going to actually kill him with this charged melee, I actually get about half of it or just under half of it back. Then you can see for a range of punches, it also works quite well with the glaive as well. You get a few punches or glaive hits in and you're getting that melee back a lot quicker than you ever would have in the past. Now, how this will translate into harder difficulty content, I'm not quite sure. Obviously, I'm only testing this out in lost sectors, but in terms of the amount of hits it takes to get that melee back, it's actually way better than it used to be. Again, this is something that I might try and mess around with and make a build for, with Arc being so strong this season, so definitely make sure to keep a lookout for that. Either way, I think this is a really cool change. So finally, we have Khepri's Horn, which is something that Bungie have tried to mess with quite a few times to make it usable, but as an exotic, it just didn't offer enough. So pre-Heresy, Khepri's Horn, essentially you would put up your barricade and it would send out a scorching line of fire, which would kind of bounce outwards and back to the barricade. It didn't require you to be on a solar subclass, and any solar weapon kills that you got would charge back, getting your barricade back. Again, it was fine, but it was just a little kind of gimmick really. It's not super powerful, it's never been super strong, and obviously it's not something that you would want to use up an exotic slot for. So Bungie have once again made some changes to it, where they say that the waves no longer return towards the barricade, they only travel outwards once, and it now sends out 3 waves of flame instead of just 1. Tracking on the wave has been enhanced. Combatants damaged by these waves are enveloped in a sunspot. Players are enveloped if the enemy is defeated, and it now requires a solar super to be equipped to create the flame waves from the barricade. And it also just still build towards a super for solar final blows with weapons as well. That still does happen. So this has changed quite a lot. So it actually now works a lot like using a barricade with Drenger's Lash. The 3 flame waves go out, the tracking on them is quite aggressive, it's nearly going to find its target at all times, unless obviously you do it in entirely the wrong direction, but it fires out. Once it kills something, the sunspot does happen on the ground. I did notice a couple of times though, I don't know if it's because the ground is uneven, I have noticed some things like that with abilities in the lost sector that I was testing in, but sometimes it seemed to create the sunspot where the enemy died, but then didn't give me the sunspot where I'm stood, which it's supposed to do. So I don't know if that's a bug that needs fixing or whatever the case may be, but generally the actual functionality of this is way better. Now, the problem for me is that it's not really any stronger. Yes, obviously, you know, you've got the sunspot aspects to it. So if you are using a solar build, you could figure something out with that. But for me, it's just not strong enough. The actual utility, the actual ability of the exotic itself, it's just not enough. Like if it had like an incandescent kind of thing to it, so where you hit an enemy and it exploded and then scorched enemies around it, that would be something that would be a little bit at least better for ad clear or something, but it just doesn't really serve that much of a purpose. Now, I probably should have said when I was talking about the Ursa Furiosa as well. So Spirit of the Bear, which is basically the Ursa Furiosa perk, that does work. The changes that have been made to Ursa Furiosa have been made on Spirit of the Bear as well, and the same with Spirit of the Horn for these Khepri's Horn changes. So now when you use Thruster as well, when you're using Spirit of the Horn, it chucks like an X pattern of flame out on the floor. So as you'll have seen in the footage, I was using a class item with Spirit of Abeyant as well as Spirit of the Horn. This wasn't by choice, it was just the only one that I had Spirit of the Horn on. And as you can see, when you do a thruster, it's actually going to suspend those enemies, and then it drops that line of fire as well. So it actually suspends and burns the enemies with that damage, which again is pretty cool. You know, you could have some fun with that, I guess, in like advent situations where there's not too much difficulty or whatever. So it's pretty cool that it does work like that, but again, it's just not something that you'd really, you know, choose to use as your exotic slot when you've got other options, especially in terms of like class items as well, when you can get things like Spirit of Armamentarium with Spirit of Inmost Light, that kind of stuff. There's just way stronger out there that in terms of even singular exotics that I don't really think it makes too much difference what they do to Khepri's. I just never think it's going to be a meta option, unfortunately. Finally guys, let's move on to warlock changes. So first up we have Storm Dancer's Brace. Storm Dancer's Brace had the exotic perk Ascending Amplitude. Each target you defeat with Storm Trance increases the damage you deal with it and refunds super energy when Storm Trance ends. So pretty simple stuff guys. The damage enhances the more enemies you kill with it, and then you get super energy back based on the kills at the end of the super. So because of the other Roman supers that we've talked about, it's basically the same thing. They're saying that they want to dial back how often you can get the supers, but wanted to give it something back. So they've doubled the damage benefit per stack of Ascendant Amplitude. Was 10% per stack, is now 20%. They've also reduced the cost of using the blink during the super by 50% as well, and therefore reduced the maximum amount of energy refunded to 30%, down from 50%. And again, guys, it's quite clear, pretty simple changes. You can see all of that in the footage from post and pre. You can see that the damage does ascend more so now than it did before, and you can see that you are left with less super energy when the super ends. I don't honestly use the Ionic Blink too much as part of this super anyway, but you definitely can see that there has been a reduction in how much super energy that costs. Again, I don't think the changes for this are all that huge. Some people do like this exotic, I know. I have made builds with it in the past, but I honestly think that you're going to be going for Fallen Sunstar, you're going to be going for Crown of Tempest, or you're going to be going for Geomags this season. Geomags will be the next thing that we're talking about. So Geomags have been changed a lot of times, again because they were a massive problem in PvP at one point. They've changed how much super energy you got back from it. They've changed whether you could top off your super energy at the top half or not, and this is where we're at now. So essentially, pre-Heresy, Geomag Stabilizer's perk Close Enough gave you improved amounts of super energy and also allowed enemies to be jolted when you kept that beam on them for long enough. In the past, when you got into the final bar before you got your super, you'd be able to sprint to top off that super quicker. They removed that because of PvP. But now they've added a new perk that says sprinting while near max bolt charge will top it off. Starts at 6 stacks of bolt charge. So from 6 stacks up to the maximum, you're going to be able to sprint to top this off to 10. Then when you use your Chaos Reach, this is going to proc the bolt charge as well, which is going to call down that additional bolt of lightning. But probably the craziest change, in my opinion, well, I think it's crazy anyway, is that they've increased the super energy gain from Ionic Traces from 2% up to 7%. Now, there are so many ways that we can create Ionic Traces, and a lot of them in a short period of time. Getting this super back is going to be insane. If you have an arc build set up and then use something like Bad Juju, you are literally going to be able to have Chaos Reaches at all times. It's actually going to be insane. Next up for Warlock, we have the second filaments. These are exotic boots. The perk is called Devouring Rift, and before obviously the change of Heresy, it said whilst using a Void super, casting Empowering Rift will grant you Devour. Damage dealt by you and your allies from within your Empowering Rift will disrupt combatants. Now, obviously, this exotic came out quite a while back, guys. This was pre-Prismatic and pre-us having so many different ways to get Devour active. Obviously, that left them behind a little bit. So essentially what they've done is now when you have Devour active, Final Blows are going to give you class ability energy. Now, I've tested this out, guys, because I already didn't think it was going to be, much different or any reason to run them. And honestly, it isn't. The amount of energy that you get back from these kills is literally the same as you would get from a perk like Strategist or from a mod that gives you back class ability energy from other things. It's actually probably even less than that. So yes, if you doubled up on that and used these with one of those things, you'd probably get a decent amount of it. But quite honestly, we've got more than enough ways of getting back class ability energy anyway, and of all abilities, it's probably one of the least important, depending on obviously the content and build that you're running. But to use this as your exotic, to then have to be locked to avoid subclass, to get devoured just to get a little bit of class ability energy per kill, I really don't think that's worth it, guys. Moving on from there, we have the Speaker's Sight Helmet, and I can't help but think that these tuning and changes have been made in line with the current Nether activity, where of course it not being able to heal is the main sort of debuff or difficulty of the entire thing. Now, I know that there was changes made anyway because of this being used in PvP and it being very strong, but it just seems to sit right that they've done this at this time. So essentially, the big change now is that the healing turret is no longer targeting allies at full health. So essentially before, it would just continue to spit out those healing bubbles and it would just top off your health and it would keep you obviously pretty much unkillable at all times. Allies need some damage done to their shields to be eligible targets. So basically, yeah, if you stand in front of this, as you can see, you can throw it down. If you're at full health and you're not taking damage, it's not going to do anything at all. It's literally just going to sit there. Only when you start to take damage will this start to actually target you and do that healing. So very simple, guys. I think it's still useful. I don't don't think this really changes too much, as long as you are not literally stood in the middle of 50 enemies pounding you and you don't have that time for this to heal you. I think you can still use this in the same way, and it's going to be just as potent. It's just not going to be, you know, topping you off with health at all times if you're not taking damage. So finally, we have the Verity's Brow, a very, very good exotic. Those who know and will have been using this for a long time. Those of you that don't know, well, perhaps it's time that you did. So once again, before I get into this, the changes and things that are being made to this exotic will also work the same for Spirit of Verity on any class items. That is going to be exactly the same. But on top of receiving these changes, they're also saying that they want to help people build into grenades more using this on Prismatic. So it's also getting a bonus grenade recharge rate, but provides 50% of the base Verity's Brow exotic. So the way that Verity's Brow works, guys, is matching up your weapon energy type with your grenade energy type. You would build up stacks of Death Throws. Death Throws gives an increase to grenade damage and grenade energy and goes up to 5 stacks. At 5 stacks, you get 100% increased grenade damage plus 2.5% bonus grenade energy for 4 seconds. However, what used to happen pre-Heresy is that you would have a timer for this, and that would go quite quickly, and even if you were at 5 stacks of Death Throws, if that timer ran out, it was gone and you'd have to build that up again. So you could be using your weapon, which was matched with your element of your grenade. You could get those kills, build up to 5 times stacks of Death Throws. If you didn't get a grenade off or weren't continuing to get those kills, your timer goes down, you lose the entire buff, and you have to start again. However, they've completely done away with the timer and instead put in a meter system for this. So now you're going to have at 1 stack, you're going to have 8 seconds, and each time the stack increases, the amount of seconds goes down. So you'll have 8 seconds at ×1, 7 at ×2, 6 at ×3, 5 at ×4, and 4 at ×5. To be clear, as an example, that means that let's say you get to your ×5 stack of Death Throws, you're going to stay in ×5 for 4 seconds, then it's going to go down to ×4 for 5 seconds, then it's go down to ×3 for 6 seconds. So essentially, if you make it to ×5 Death Throws, it's going to take 30 seconds. You're going to have Death Throws for 30 seconds, whilst it gradually moves down from ×5 stacks down to 4, 3, 2, and 1, and then will eventually go. But this is way, way better than how it used to be. You've got almost quadruple the amount of time of Death Throws being up, even if the stacks are de-escalating as you go. You've still got that perk active, and it's much easier to keep and build back up again as well. So this is fantastic, guys. If you have a grenade based build, use Verity's Brow, use something with Spirit of Verity on it, and this, in my opinion, other than closely seconded by Geomag stabilizers, I think this is definitely the W change for the Warlock. So guys, that is everything. That is all pre and post changes to exotic armors, whether that is buffs, nerfs, or just additional changes. That is everything you need to know for exotic armors for this season. Let me know down in the comments below which ones you're most happy about and which ones you're thinking of trying out. But until next time, guys, I thank you as always for your support. If you do feel like I deserved a like or your subscription today, then I would be more than appreciative if you would do so. But wherever you are in the world, have a great day, and I'll catch you next time. Bye bye.